do go bump in the night. It is in every state and every country, and there is no escaping it, no matter how safe you feel behind your locked doors and latched windows. So we invite you to turn down the lights and turn up your radio while we join Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis, your hosts, on a journey into the darkness on the edge of town.
Hello and welcome. It's time for another edition of the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Today, seance, spiritual ritual, and the search for ectoplasm. That's our topic. Shannon Taggart is our guest. Shannon is a photographer based in Brooklyn, New York. Her photographs, they've been exhibited and featured internationally, including within the publications of Time, New York Times Magazine, Discover, and Newsweek. Her work has been recognized by Nikon, Magnum Photos, and the Ing Morath Foundation, American Photography, the International Photography Awards, and the Alexia Foundation for World Peace. Boy, those are some nice little pedigrees to have behind your name there, Shannon. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's great. What an amazing deal to be a photographer. First of all, I love photography. I love the art of it. I've been friends with Henry Diltz, the famous rock artist and musical artist, photographer, and just I admire so much of the work that these people do. What got you from photography into the whole idea of seance and the spiritualist movement and the search for ectoplasm?
Well, I was working as a photojournalist in upstate New York, and I started to do some public relations photography, and my real love has always been documentary work. And so while I was paying the bills, I was looking for a project that I could be really creative with. And so I thought, why don't I just try to make a short project about Lilydale, which is the world's largest spiritualist community. And I knew about Lilydale because I grew up nearby in Buffalo, New York. And Lilydale's about an hour drive away. And when I was a teenager, my family had this really intense experience with a medium there. And she ended up telling us the true story of how my grandfather passed. And it was like a very big, shocking moment for us all. And that always stuck in my mind. So I thought, why don't I try and do like a simple project about this quirky little town of spiritualists? And I ended up expanding it into a 16-year body of work that I'm finally now trying to tie together.
That's awesome. Now, you've got to reel back the story for a second. You go there, and the family is suddenly given this information regarding your grandfather. Was there a mystery surrounding the death of your grandfather?
My cousin went, in Lilydale, they do, in the summer, it kind of operates as like a spiritualist summer camp. And you can take classes in mediumship, and there's free healing services, and then all around the town, all day long, they have what they call message services, which is when you sit in the woods, and they have beautiful woods there with the virginwood forest, and you go deep into the woods, and there's all these benches, and the mediums stand in the front, and they just pick out people to give short messages to. So it's anonymous. You don't like fill out your name or anything. You just go and sit on a bench, and the mediums will pick you out, and it could be like up to like 200 people sitting there, and they'll just randomly pick. So this medium just randomly picked my cousin and ended up describing the last moments of my grandfather's life, which turned out to be a true story that nobody really talked about. It was kind of kept secretive. And so it was just really shocking because also it had happened, I think at that point, probably 30 years before. And this woman didn't know my cousin's name or anything. So it just always stuck in my head. How could somebody possibly know something like that? That's so strange. It's just very, very bizarre. And I remember the emotional impact it had, on my family and the shock of it. And so that's really what drew me in. My cousin Rita.
Well, all right. So now this is where I'm intrigued. As somebody who has had a lifelong fascination with the paranormal and spiritualist movement and such, as a photographer, what drew you to this topic, though, knowing that what you're photographing is not something that is tangible or likely to be caught on film. You know, when you're talking the spiritualist movement, you can show the Ouija, you can show the seances, you can show spirit boards or bones or cards or whatever, but kind of the culmination of what we're trying to communicate with, as you know, doesn't just make itself known on film.
That's a really interesting question. And it's true. I mean, it was an odd topic to pick to try to depict visually. And early on, I just started taking really straightforward images, you know, and then after a while, I got really frustrated. Like, these are just boring. They're not really speaking about the psychological reality of these events. You know, I'm in these charged atmospheres in these dark rooms, and people are telling me they're talking to, you know, a room full of spirits, and this is happening, and they're getting information, and there's all these invisible exchanges, and my photographs weren't really speaking about this. And what ended up happening is I started to have some happy accidents with my camera, where things would happen that I didn't plan. Ooh. That ended up having real kind of connections, like synchronicity. I always try to explain it as like I started having this photographic synchronicity. And the more I tried to play with that, the more interesting the project got. And so it took, and I think that's why the project has taken me so long, because it was such a hard thing to photograph and really grapple with. And then once I figured out how to do it, I really tried to take that idea as far as I could. So the images kind of, there's some that are very straightforward in storytelling and documenting just very straightforward things, or spiritualist objects. But then there's this other side of the work where I really try to play with the photographic process and accidents and orbs and long exposures. And I really try to let the camera show me a visual metaphor for the invisible situation.
All right. Well, that's a great way to answer this. Now, let me reel you back a bit, if I could, because you just dropped a word that to a lot of the paranormal community makes them cringe when we hear the word orbs. And now I'm curious, as a photographer, somebody whose life and career is based on understanding how a camera works, how your subject works, what is going to happen in these kind of photographs, when we look at the anomalies of orbs, we have people that will tell you that it is nothing more than dust, moisture, or insects that are caught in most of these photographs. And I'm one of those people who have believed that for a long time because I can recreate it. And usually those orb photographs are caught in dusty basements, dusty attics, or out in a field somewhere. And that's why, to me, it's very hard for me to really ascertain that this is a spiritual connection as opposed to a dusty connection. What do you consider to be the orb phenomena? And how do you debunk your own photographs, whether you're getting something you believe to be truly spiritual as opposed to dust on the lens or floating around the room?
So I mention orbs because I really feel like orbs are kind of like the spirit photography of today. And I do want to, at some point, talk a little bit more about the history of spiritualism and photography, because that's really important and really fascinating. But, you know, so the orb experimentation that's going on, that's definitely the spirit photography of today. And so because of that, I made an effort to try and understand it and try to see if, experiment in that way. And what I found was it's not so much about if orbs are dust or water there's a tons of literature of people trying to analyze and disprove. It's more about what I find interesting about orbs is when people try to call them in or make them react or call them into patterns or sit there and try to get the room to fill up with orbs. So again, it's this like photographic synchronicity that happens with it. And
now that I will agree that to me is a fascinating aspect of it. And our good friend Chris Fleming, who we've had on the show just with us a few weeks ago talking about animal spirits, he is one of the only people I've watched, and he'll say, I'm picking up an energy right here, and he'll literally put his hands in front of him, and he'll say, take a photograph now, and you take a photograph, and there's a big white ball of light. Or he puts his hand off to the left and you take a picture and he says there's something right here, and you get this pattern. It almost looks like a doily in some cases. It's this white ball with almost a crystalline appearance inside of it. To me, that's been more fascinating, like you said, because he's pointing to it. Is that synchronistic? Did he just happen to notice there's dust there, and he knew that if you took a picture, you'd capture it? Is it some kind of spiritual energy? There's so much of that fascinates me, and he's the only one I've ever seen that I've watched call upon them, and you can start photographing, and you'll start seeing things appear.
Yeah, that does happen with certain people, and I have seen it, and I've actually, I try to make an effort to like look through other people's photos, or sometimes people will send me pictures, or, I took an orb class in Lilydale, and the teacher had the most amazing picture of an orb that seriously looked like a man's face in it. And then she had a picture of the man, and it was taken on the anniversary of his death. And they were thinking of him, and they said, appear to us in an orb. And it really honestly looked like a picture of him inside this orb. And that's one of the freakiest ones I've seen. And then I've had my own orb experience where I don't often get orbs.
All right, so you don't often get...
because I'm using a...
I was just going to say, you don't often get orbs. When you do see them, are you able to differentiate kind of, this is definitely a particulate that's just got itself into my photograph, as opposed to something spiritual again?
Well, and I should say that this is my biggest personal body of work, but I work professionally as a photographer. I've shot, editorial, commercial work, public relations, advertising, and, the orb thing is not a problem for me. And I rarely even get them when I'm in a spiritual setting with people trying to do orb stuff. So I believe it's because I'm using a sensor that's very large. And the orbs seem to come on the smaller cameras, the smaller sensors with the lenses that aren't as of high quality. But I'll tell you, just as an anecdote of weird experience I had, is I went to Sardinia, and I was there as part of like a spiritualist conference, and the people I was who were hosting, they are orb photographers, and they go up into the mountains in Sardinia and say Catholic prayers, and then go orb hunting with their cameras. And I said, I'll go with you, and I'm going to bring my camera, but I'm not going to get orbs, because I really, very rarely I'll get very, sometimes I'll get ones that, that are very insignificant and don't feel meaningful at all. And so they said, well, if you go up to the mountains with us and we say our prayers, you'll get orbs. And so I went up, and they did their prayers, and I took a picture, and I think this one's on my website. There are orbs over every inch of this picture, every inch. And it was not raining. They were not bugs. It was dry. I could not see these things with my eyes. But as far as I can zoom in on this file, it's just orb upon orb upon orb upon orb. And that was the only time I've ever gotten anything like that in my life. It was really very freaky for me.
That's pretty cool, right? So they're calling upon them, and all of a sudden you're just inundated with this energy.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I mean, photographically, I really, truly understand the photographic process, and I'm actually playing with this idea of trick photography, or what can the medium do? Like, how far can I take this, and what is really happening? I'm asking those questions myself, and but I truly understand the optics and the graphics, and I really don't have an explanation for that experience.
Now, were you able to see any of these orbs with the naked eye, or while you're only looking through the camera lens?
No, I wasn't. I didn't see anything.
Okay. So that's not going on. And I'm just, again, in those kind of situations, curious how that works. I've seen some light orbs physically in front of my eyes, and that's, that gives you a moment to pause when you start to see energy in front of you. Right. And I'm not a psychic or a medium, so this, when you see something, it's very profound. But in the photographs, I've always been intrigued by, why do you find them in photographs but not with the naked eye? And on the ones where you're capturing these orbs, Are you using a flash, or are you just taking the photograph naturally?
Yeah, you're using the flash. And I asked, I took this orb class with a woman who's been teaching it for, a really long time. I don't even know, maybe 20 years. And she believes that it's the ions of the flash make them, more active or more visible or attracts them. So you're right. Like if you're going to have dust and you flash it, that would be like a good way to do it. But a lot of these things are not, and water looks different. So I don't really, and I haven't done the tests myself personally, but water looks different than the orbs. Like when you photograph water with a flash, and dust really does. I don't know, and I'm open to an idea like, oh, well, it's just an optical thing. But I've been in situations where it's like I really can't explain what exactly it is. And the weirdest thing is when I've seen this happen where a woman says, oh, I wish I could just see the orbs. And everybody focuses, they're like, okay, give her orbs. And then the next picture, she's got orbs over her eyeballs. Like, it's like a playful, it was like a playful thing. I wish I could see them. And the next picture, they're like right over her eyes. It's just like weird stuff like that happens. I really don't know how to, so yeah, like what you were saying earlier, okay, maybe it was dust that just landed right over her eyes for this funny photographic pun that actually makes sense to what people were trying to manifest. It's bizarre. It can be bizarre.
And when you're doing the photography as well, have you started to train yourself to physically start to sense your surroundings? So you're not just being led to, okay, take pictures now. Like, do you start to sense and go, this is when I feel it, and just start ripping off shots and pick up these spiritual energies?
Well, yeah, like when I'm in the seance situations, I try to go with it as much as possible. So I'll sit in one seat, I'll have my camera on the tripod, and I'll just set up the shot, and I won't even really look through the camera. I'll just take the picture and kind of let the camera make the image by just allowing the shutter to automate the process. So I try to take myself out of it as much as possible, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like I try to limit the decisions I'm making. So I try to be part of the experience and then just like click, when I feel like, something might be happening.
Right.
And I have had a lot of really interesting pictures, and, to a photographer, that's just a long exposure. But to a spiritualist, they're like, oh my gosh, that's this spirit. And then, there are other people who are like, well, it's kind of weird, but it's, right. I love that they have multiple interpretations, and that, like it's what the meaning is decided by the viewer. So I'm not trying to like tell anybody anything. I'm actually trying to like engage people or like, raise more questions than answer any.
Talk to me. You wanted to get into the spiritualist and photography, that kind of rich history for it. Where would you like to begin in that part of the journey? Well,
early on in I went to RIT, the Rochester Institute of Technology, mm-hmm. and that's like, it's like a photo haven. It's they have advertising, biomed, photography, fashion, photojournalism, like you name it, technical photography, everything. And we studied the photographic history pretty extensively. But when I got to Lilydale, the spiritualist told me, oh, well, there's this thing called spirit photography. And they started showing me these historical pictures from the mid to late 1800s, and onward, that documented spiritualism in a very bizarre way. And I was shocked that I had never learned about this history. And the reason I didn't know about it is because it was written out of the history books I learned from. Now there's more of awareness of this history, but these images are some of like the wackiest, most bizarre and uniquely disturbing. That's the way I kind of describe them. They're uniquely disturbing.
Okay, in what sense? Can you explain that to me?
If anybody, I don't know I should explain what ectoplasm is, but there's a lot of the images have ectoplasm, which is a spiritualist term for a white substance that is both spiritual and material at the same time, and it can emerge from a medium's body and kind of take form. And when you see these pictures, it's like this white substance oozing out of mostly women who are sometimes half naked, and it's just going everywhere, and there's all these male investigators around, like kind of looking at it and trying to study it. And it has a lot of comparisons, ectoplasm, to like other human substances, and relates to birth and sex and death in this very bizarre way. And the pictures are ridiculous looking because it looks very two-dimensional and fake and phony, but the actuality of the event is so charged and strange that I just was fascinated with these pictures. And I had to know more about them. So I started to do a lot of research on spiritualist history in terms of photography.
Very cool. And with the ectoplasmic, and now I've seen this, some of they believe were like cheesecloth and things that would be projected from the mouth. And
mm-hmm.
Is that kind of the imagery that you're talking about? Some of those?
Yeah. And, I think, cheesecloth or, sheets or white material, that's what most people believe that they are. But what I found surprising is when I first started this project, and spiritualists couldn't acknowledge the phony look of the pictures, but a lot of them still believe in the reality of ectoplasm. Like, the pictures don't necessarily shake their belief in that ectoplasm is a reality. It's like a spiritual force. So I wanted to see, early on I was like, wow, I wonder if there are still people who are doing ectoplasm seances. And if so, I want to find them and photograph them. And I want to see if this is really happening still in this time, in this era, if this Victorian tradition of producing ectoplasm. And so that kind of became the narrative of my book, my search for ectoplasm, and like all the places I went trying to find it.
I'm always interested too when you have somebody that kind of starts to open up to this, and you're seeing the proof, you're seeing things that are kind of life altering and changing to you. Have you become more sensitive, do you think, now yourself to spiritual energy, ghosts, things like that?
Yes, I definitely think so. I mean, when I first began the project, I could not wrap my brain around how somebody could be a sane person and talk with dead people. But I realized early on, like the people I was meeting at Lilydale, and I knew nothing about spiritualism, and they were so gracious, and they literally taught me everything about their religion, because I was so curious. And, so I got a full education just by meeting people who lived in Lilydale. And, I realized they weren't crazy. They really were having these experiences, and that these experiences were meaningful for the people that they were exchanging them with. So I became more open. And because I was photographing so much, I ended up taking so many classes, like mediumship classes. And I really put myself in and tried it. And sometimes I would be able to, I'm a novice, but I would be able to give a message to somebody that made sense when I was walked through these exercises that they do in the early mediumship development classes. And so that was pretty fascinating to me. And I do think it helped me creatively and helped my photography in a lot of ways. Just the whole the way that they think about consciousness and the way to use your mind and the way to engage with the invisible.
Were you able to, during these sessions, these seances, I found it rather frustrating. In 2017, 2018, when I'm invited to a few of these seances with some well-known evidential and trance mediums, they would be done in these low light settings or no light settings. Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning earlier that, how do you really capture the concept of what it is you're doing when you can't see anything and you can't share that? When you were doing any of the research, did you come upon any of these charlatans that you found out were faking things or might be manipulating what you were looking at or experiencing?
Well, yeah, I guess there's two schools of thought. Like, most spiritualists, I would say for the most part, what is popular and what is valued and what is put forward is very much what you see in TV shows like The Long Island Medium, where you're in a white room, everything's lit and friendly, and it's just clairvoyance, and it's just words and moments being exchanged, and there's no need for a dark room, and there's no need for a seance situation. It's much more rare to find the dark room and the low light and the people doing what is termed physical mediumship. And there's a lot of debate about, some people see it's the way of the past, but some people argue that that's how spiritualism began, so it should still be honored and played with. And in those situations, stage magic tricks and performance and theater are so embedded in it. And there's a term that a lot of researchers use called mixed mediumship. So, are people doing mixed mediumship? Is it totally real? Is it shamanic magic, which means that it's a magical act but is done for spiritual purposes? It's all a big kind of, it's a big ball of wax. And I usually go in those situations and just document and then put forth the pictures and allow people to read whatever they want into them. And I try to detach from drawing any judgments. And also, too, what I realized early on in my project is I was, as far as I know, the only professional documentarian traveling around documenting what is left of modern spiritualism. So I also take seriously, even if some people tell me, oh, that person's a fraud, don't go and photograph them, I will still go, because whatever is happening is still happening in this day and age, and so I want to document it. So even if there is mediumistic fraud and somebody tells me don't go to that person, I still will go and document and see what's there. And
isn't it interesting then? Do you ever ask, well, how do we define what are they doing that's considered fraud as opposed to what everybody else is doing?
Right. And there'll be, I just feel like all paranormal or spiritual or whatever the correct term would be to refer to it, there's always an interior element that is part of it. So that's always missing from the observer, or if I'm sitting in a room watching somebody give a message, I actually really can't know what's happening because I'm not also inside that person's head. Right. And I've seen messages that sound like such crap to me. And then somehow they are like the most meaningful, super important and very canny. And that was missed on me because I had no relation to what was actually going on. And so I've sent people to a medium I think is really good and they have an awful reading, or then some people will go to a reading or medium that everybody thinks is bad and they'll have the most incredible experience. I don't know. There's this very unpredictable element.
Well, and it's subjective too. What are you looking at and what are you hoping to get from the experience? When you're there as kind of an observer, a disassociated observer, just watching, the image or the message that comes through may seem inconsequential and silly to you, right? And be like, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. That's what you had. That's what you're able to share. And it's so meaningful to them because it wasn't something grandiose. It wasn't something like a lightning bolt that was being thrown down to convince them. It was the most subtle of messages that resonated with them. Yeah. And I've watched that myself, and I've thought, I sat there when we began the show back in 2006, and we were at a conference, and I watched this woman doing a gallery session in a large room, and the guy I was standing next to just kept shaking his head, and he said, boy, these people are gullible. They're just so stupid. And I said, are they really? Because as far as I'm concerned, I've watched a lot of my friends go through years of therapy, and they don't seem to find resolve or comfort. And sometimes in the words this medium gives them in a 3 or 5 minute reading, you can see a physical change in who they are. And watching what they do. And I said, my job isn't here to judge. And You look at the fat girl with the greasy hair who's staring at the floor, and you tell her, oh, you feel bad about yourself. Your dad worries about you. And all of a sudden she gets that look, and you're beautiful. Your father says you're beautiful. Sure, there are key elements you can pick with some people and really bring them out of it. But again, I don't see the harm in that. Because if you're bringing somebody out of a shell and making them feel connected to something greater than what they are, and that gives them the confidence to lift their head and make eye contact with people again. To me, I think it's a magical elixir, and I don't care if it's real or not in most cases, if it helps people, and I've seen it help people for years that no longer need to feel connected. They don't have to try, or they've got that final word from mom or dad, that apology, that I love you, and sometimes that's all it takes to set them back on a new course.
Yeah, I agree with you, but what also, one of the points I want to make too is that I think for people who've never been around mediums or had a experience with spiritualism, they think it's mostly just people who want to make money and get rich and trick people, which I found it was the exact opposite. I was meeting mediums who truly believed in what they were doing, who were not making very much money at all, who saw what they were doing as healing. And, just by observing mediums, I remember one of the first sessions I sat in on with a medium in Lilydale named Gretchen Clark. She's like a 5th generation medium, and she was like the first person to let me sit in on a reading. And these two people, and I knew these two people, she said, all these things, these details, your mother had a horse and it kicked her in the chest, and your father had like a brother that you don't know he had, and all of these things. And they just sat there going, nope, 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 nope. And so she closed her eyes and just looked at them and said, I'm sorry, that's what I have to give you. That's what they had to tell me. And they went home and researched, and almost every single thing was true, but they never reported this back to her. And so I went and I asked her, I said, well, they found everything was true. And she's like, well, that's nice to have that, but I don't need that because I know I'm doing the work. So it's nice that you gave me that feedback that they found out it was true, but I knew that was what I had to tell them. So I was fine with what happened. So things like that made me realize that the mediums, it was important it was something that they believed in too, if that makes sense. So it's not only that you have somebody right. who's getting a message, but you also have somebody who's giving a message who believes that what they're doing is healing. Most of the time, I'm not saying that there's not charlatans out there. Of course right. There are, but I'm saying that's not really the norm. And
now you got somebody pretty incredible to be a part of this book with you. You've got Dan Aykroyd writing the foreword. How did you come into contact with Dan?
Yes, no, I do, and I'm so thankful for that. And I randomly met him. He was in Lilydale with his family, and a mutual friend who I didn't even know we had in common, his wife and I, put us in touch. And so then I was able to meet them in Lilydale, and we went to a few different events, and he offered to do the foreword. I was able to show him my photographs, and we had an exchange, and he also was very interested in the photography. And so he offered, and I was so incredibly thankful for that too.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. A lot of people don't realize, they've seen the Coneheads movies, they've seen the Blues Brothers movies, they've seen the Ghostbusters movies, but he and his family have years of spiritualism and research and connection to the paranormal realm. And
yes.
So that's really kind of cool. We've had him on our show twice. I think I mentioned you off air. We had him back in 2006 when he was talking about his DVD, Dan Aykroyd Unplugged on UFOs. And then a few years back, I want to say, almost going back maybe 7 years now, his father released a book. And Dan and his father, Peter, came on the show together. And that was historic, just to hear the two of them talk and share their real life insights.
Yeah, and that book is actually really good. Yeah, they really know the history. And I've talked about this before I even met Dan Aykroyd. I've written about this, and in my artist talk mentioned that, the reason that ectoplasm is a term that people are familiar with is because of Ghostbusters.
Right.
But most people don't realize he's drawing this term from this from spiritualist history, and he's a fourth generation spiritualist. But people don't make that connection or don't often know about that. I find that people are very surprised by that. And so, I mean, he's really responsible for some of the, I call ectoplasm the iconography of spiritualism. So he's really put forth in this interesting way the iconography of spiritualism.
We need to take a quick break. Seance is the culmination of Shannon Taggart's 16-year-long project on modern spiritualism. We'll continue to hear about her journey, some of her experiences in this realm, and we'll find out about how you can get the book and more. When we return, you're listening to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.
Hi, this is Ben Domenech, the host of the Federalist Radio Hour. We're a daily show coming to you 5 days a week from Washington, D.C., where we interview our nation's top journalists, politicians, authors, chefs, economists, entertainers, and more. If you're looking for a contrarian discussion on news, politics, or culture, give us a listen and subscribe at podcastone.com, the new Podcast One app, or at Apple Podcasts.
Hey, this is Chris Jericho inviting you to the first ever rock and wrestling Rager at Sea. Picture this: rock and roll, wrestling, comedy, live podcasting, all on the open ocean from October 27th to the 31st, 2018, from Miami to Nassau. I'm bringing Hall of Fame wrestlers, some of the greatest rock and roll bands on the planet, and putting the first wrestling ring on a cruise ship ever. Don't be a stupid idiot. Make the list. Check us out at ChrisJerichoCruise.com.
Yo, the good thing about keeping it 100, we talk about all my favorite topics: pro wrestling, sports, politics, pop culture. We got unique segments like the Crazy Juventud Guerrero. We got Shane Helms. We got the Lucha Libre Minute.
Listen now at podcastone.com, the Podcast One app, or subscribe on iTunes. Keeping it 100 with Conan.
Beyond the Darkness.
Hello, welcome back. This is Beyond the Darkness, your home for the best in paranormal talk radio 5 nights a week. 5 nights you can find us here with anywhere from a 60 to 90-minute episode as we look into the strange and the supernatural world around us with some of the most fascinating guests. Like tonight's guest, Shannon Taggart is with us. She has a new book, Seance, Spiritualist Ritual, and the Search for Ectoplasm. It's photographs by Shannon Taggart and a foreword by Dan Aykroyd, creator of Ghostbusters, and is a fourth-generation spiritualist himself. She is here talking to us about her work and research. And one thing I need to know about, because I've been at so many investigations where when things start to pick up, Shannon, and activity seems to be happening, equipment starts to shut down. Now, I don't know, is that because it's in the hands of an amateur and they don't know what they're doing? Maybe they didn't really charge the battery as well as they thought they had. Do you have any of those snafus when you were trying to do this work where all of a sudden your equipment doesn't work, you walk into another room and it's right back to full charge?
I've never had the battery drain, but I've been around people who with other types of recorders like video and audio recorders where that has happened. For me, I had one experience where my camera took like 300 pictures by itself. And it really freaked me out because I look at the card and there were just like 300 black pictures. Ooh. And I have no idea how that happened.
Well, did you start examining each one to see if any kind of creepy face starts to show up at all?
Yeah, no, they were just like blank. Thankfully, they were just blank, but still, it was weird. But I mean, I've had a few different ones, but I'm more of like I've heard of other people having experiences where something very real happens and their camera they can't take the picture. I've heard that from multiple people. And like, for example, there was a friend of mine who they climbed a mountain in honor of somebody who had passed away. And when they got up there, they placed a flag, and then a black bird came and sat by the flag. And they both had cameras, and they tried to photograph this bird, and both their cameras would not allow them to photograph this bird. And as soon as the bird flew away, their cameras would work again. And I mean, these are people who are complete skeptics and not even into the paranormal at all. And then I've had people who told me they're on, ghost hunts and they actually see something, and at that point they can't take the picture. That specifically has never happened to me, but I've heard the story over and over again. And I've met many spiritualists who think that we're not meant to have that picture. So they think that we're not meant to really document it in that way. So I guess that's what kind of my approach is, okay, well, if photography can't do that, what can it do? Like, and I kind of see the photographs that I'm making as not directly documenting, because I feel like it's something I can't, like we were talking earlier about the interior experience, that's something that's impossible for me to document, but I can create something that resonates with that experience or plays with the idea of that experience or works off the energy of that experience and, you know, becomes something else. I guess that's the best way I would describe it.
Have you ever been in a position where you're doing this work, you're at a location, and something really unnerves you, spiritually, ghosty, whatever you want to call it?
Oh, yeah, I feel like I've had a lot of those experiences, but one of my, one of my most dramatic visual experiences was I was in England at there's a spiritualist college called Arthur Findlay College, and it's sort of like, the best way to describe it is like a Harry Potter Hogwarts for adult spiritualists. It's like this huge estate, and you go and they have classes all year round the clock in spiritualism, trance, psychic studies, healing, spirit art, like anything you can think of. And so you go and you take the courses there, and then you stay in the college, and you eat all your meals there. So it's really like, going to boarding school for a short period of time. And I was there, and there was a physical medium named Gordon Garforth, and I met him, and he said, I'm a physical medium, and I use ectoplasm to change the shape of my hands and my face. And I was thinking, okay, I probably won't see that in your seance, because I've noticed a lot of people will tell you that you're going to see something and then you don't end up seeing anything. That happens a lot. Or everybody in the room sees something that's subjective or, in their mind's eye, that it's not an objective reality for the whole room. That often happens. So I go to his seance, and I'm sitting in the front row, and there's a red light on, and he's sitting in a chair, and his wife is sitting next to him, and she said, okay, Gordon's now, the spirits are going to use the ectoplasm to change the shape of Gordon's hands. And he put his hand out, and to me, it looked like it just effortlessly skipped into this gigantic shape. And I was 6 feet away. It was not too low of light, and he was wearing short sleeves, and he just put the hand out, and it just seemed to jump into this big form. And I screamed, which is like a very impolite thing to do in a seance. And then everybody else started screaming too. And so I couldn't tell if they were screaming because I was screaming, or did they see the big hand? What was going on? It became pandemonium. And I was convinced, like I was taking pictures at this time, and I was convinced that, okay, I hypnotically rendered this large hand, because we're in a dark room under red light. And, a neuroscientist would say that kind of a situation makes your brain crave the details, or, makes it try to fill in pieces. But a spiritualist would say, no, that's just like a lighting condition that's conducive for ectoplasm.
Right.
So
Silly guy. How did he not know that?
I was convinced that it would be a small hand in my picture. But there was a giant hand in my picture, and it looked different than what I saw with my eyes, but it was still giant there. So it was either the most elegant magic trick ever that, like just totally mystified, like David Copperfield level, like, magic trick, or I had this hypnotic experience induced by the suggestion, and then my camera shutter mimicked it by coincidence, or he has a really big hand that he makes come out and with the spirits. And, I love that all of those possibilities are truly embedded, and it felt like it really happened. Like, it was wild, just wild. And, so that's one of the most, like, I guess, dramatic visuals. Oftentimes I won't see anything, and then my camera will be like the creepiest photos, or, I'll photograph something that doesn't seem high energy, but I'll get these very strange renditions. Or one time I was in a seance and everybody was seeing a doubled face that looked exactly like the woman's face, but it wasn't her, and it was sitting right next to her. And, when I got my film back, I was shooting film, and this is an early shot, the exact visual of that was there. And I wasn't trying to make a long exposure at all. I was trying to make a sharp, simple picture of the situation, and it was there, and it was exactly how everybody was describing what they were seeing with their eyes. And, I've had a lot of really strange experiences of all different types while photographing.
That's pretty exciting. And to have that actually happen and unfold in front of your eyes again, and look, and you've got the photographic proof. Are you familiar with a gentleman by the name of Mark Macy?
Yes. I have his book. I don't know him personally. I've met people who've been photographed by him and say that it was a very wild experience.
You're talking to one right now.
Yes, he built a device. I forget what it's called. The Illuminator, maybe?
Yes, something along those lines, right?
Right. Is he still doing work?
I haven't spoken to him in a number of years, but I had him at a couple of our conferences at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. And he would bring this device, which he said put up this kind of like static bubble. I don't know how else to explain it. And then he would photograph you using a Polaroid camera. And he would capture what he believed to be are these ghostly visages around you.
Right.
And I watched him, and I said, I'm just curious, Mark. I think you're kind of moving your hand down when you're taking the Polaroid. And he handed me the camera. He goes, then you take it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this is it, baby. I'm going to prove this guy's nuts. And I held that camera as straight as I could, and I took the picture. I was getting the same effect. Picture after picture.
What was it, like a flash? Did it flash?
It would. I can't remember if he had a flash on it or not. I just remember him taking the picture, and, I'm taking the picture with the old Polaroid camera, which was harder and harder to find film for at that point.
Right.
But they would come out, and the weird aspects of this to me was the person wouldn't move. But in some of the images, you would see a ghostly version of their face almost looking down or looking up in a totally different direction from their head. And it wasn't like you tipped the camera. You're getting, like, you could see under their chin, like they were looking up. And there are versions where you could look at them and it looked like an 80-year-old version imprinted over their 30-year-old face.
Yeah.
And that to me was really strange. I didn't know what I was looking at and had those experiences myself watching it. And that's something. And I had people tell me, well, it's the film and he's doing this with the camera and doing that with the camera. And he let me look that camera over, and I had a buddy of mine, Bill Murphy, who's kind of a photographic expert, and he was going through the camera. He brought his own film. We plugged it in. We were getting the same effect.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, what my philosophy, and I have seen some of his, I've seen his pictures, and there's some of them that are just truly creepy. I mean,
right.
they are bizarre. And I guess my take on it is, even if it's a long exposure and he's doing a ghosting of an image, it's like what's happening with it. Because that, I'll explain to people, when you do a long exposure, there's no way to control what's happening, really.
Right.
I mean, I've played with long exposure a lot quite seriously for over 10 years. And I've tried to incorporate it into like a portrait project that I did and I've done commercially. And it's a strange thing. You really have no control over how it's going to render, even if you think you do. It depends on light and the amount of motion and what exactly is moving. Is it the subject or the camera? I mean, it's a thing that's really hard to make to manifest the same result over and over again,
Right. And having been there firsthand, it wasn't long exposures. He just popped the button. He wasn't holding it longer. I took the pictures the same way. It was just a quick shot of the button, and we were getting just the most bizarre results from that.
Yeah, and I've talked to multiple people who've said the exact same thing, that being photographed by him was a very bizarre experience. So,
and during that research, did you look at, I know out of California, there's a very famous house, they call it the Spirit Writer or Ghost Writer, where these people that own the house, they'll just start popping off pictures on their Polaroid, and they'll ask questions, and answers will be written in kind of these puffy white clouds that produce
I've
on the
never
pictures.
seen these. I'm gonna have to look into this.
Yes, it's a remarkable story. We had them on our show a number of years ago.
Oh wow!
And I'll try to find the information and send over the links to you on it. It is pretty pretty crazy. And I know for a while they stopped letting people in because it was really kind of upsetting their whole world.
Wow. Well, yeah, and one of my favorite moments in the history of spirit photography is the Ted Serios images. Are you familiar with those?
It sounds so familiar to me, and right now my mind is in about 2,000 places, so please, for our listeners' sake, explain who Ted Serios is and what the pictures were.
In the 1970s, he was a bellhop in Chicago, and he was studied by a number of people, but most prominently Jules Eisenbud.
Right. Okay. Yep.
And he would drink a lot of alcohol and get these Polaroid cameras and make these wild images that he said were the projections of his own thoughts. And he did them under crazy conditions, like 60 feet away from the camera. Like the conditions that he was able to make these pictures in are just fun, inside a Faraday cage, stripped naked, 3 feet away from the camera, 60 feet away from the camera. It's a really wild story. And Jules Eisenbud wrote a book about it, but even if somehow he's using something to get images on it, it's really a mystery how that was happening and how he was getting these pictures so consistently.
Was he also he was projecting images onto the undeveloped film, correct?
Well, he said he was using his mind to be doing this, but he had this thing called a gizmo that people said he was using to project. But he's made pictures without the gizmo, and then he was able to make overexposed and underexposed ones that looked like they had no exposure, even though they were taken with a flash, and vice versa. So it's a really trippy story. I mean, it's definitely an interesting moment in the history of psychic photography. Yeah.
Right. Now, I know there's been some really great work done with the psychic photography as well. In some cases, they almost like remote viewing, they would be given envelopes with pictures inside the envelopes, and then they would project onto the film, and they would take photographs of the person's forehead, and you would see these ghost images of like the Eiffel Tower. Then they would open it up, and you would see the Eiffel Tower inside the envelope.
Oh, wow.
And these envelopes were being pulled at random.
Wow. I mean, I know they did some of that with Ted Serios. That was one of the things they would do. They would bring an image and leave it in another room and say, project what the image is. And so even if he, was able to fake a slide on a camera, he didn't know the image before he got into the room. So it's, mysterious. But I've never seen those specific images either. So I'll have to look into those too.
Yeah, I should connect you with Bill Murphy because he is an expert on all of that and what was going on, and he probably can put you in touch with a lot of the people that were involved in these experiments. We saw some really great stuff like that unfold in front of ourselves at a Glen Tavern Inn in California. They did some experiments, and there was some really interesting results that were happening right there on site. And again, it was random envelopes, random photographs, people just holding the envelope, and it was manila thick envelopes. You couldn't see the image inside, and they were somehow projecting these images. It was really, really uncanny. So, the whole idea of photography and what all could be involved in it, like the, I'm sure you're probably familiar with the skull experiment.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting? They would take undeveloped rolls, unphotographed rolls of film, put them on the table underneath like a glass dome. They would have these weekly seances. Then they would go develop that film right on site, and there would be messages scrawled on the film, and there would be images.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing because I was able to see some of the skull material. This past May, I went to Spain, and I met Robin and Sandra Foy, who were two of the 4 people involved in the skull experiment, and they brought all the apports that the skull received. So I was able to photograph them for the book. But they didn't bring the films with them. They were in storage. But yes, that's a huge moment in psychic photography history. Yeah. Very interesting. And they're really interesting, great people. And I was so excited that they actually brought all the skull apports to our lunch meeting. It was really
that's
really
amazing.
exciting.
And for our listeners that don't know what apports are, they're things that just develop out of thin air. They would be sitting at this table holding hands doing a seance, and all of a sudden a newspaper would drop on the table. And they would have it tested, and it was, that one newspaper was like 40 or 50 years old.
Right, yeah.
And the ink measured, but it looked like a brand new newspaper.
Yeah, and one of the things that they brought, which I think was my favorite object, was they were apported that Thomas Edison, the spirit of Thomas Edison, they said apported instructions on how to build a device to talk to him.
Right.
And I forget what it was called, instrumental transdimensional.
Yes, ITC,
the
instrumental
ITC.
Transcommunication device, yeah.
And so they brought the device that they then built, that they then used successfully, they said, to communicate. And it was just such an interesting thing to see, something that had been, apported, the plans had been apported, and then they constructed it for communication.
Yeah, I'll have to talk to you off air. I've been trying to get in touch with somebody from the actual skull experiment for years, and I would love the chance to try to communicate with them and have somebody on the show, because that documentary has really fascinated me. Oh,
yeah. Yeah. And Robin actually has written 2 books of his own, and they're great. It's one is about his early days in physical mediumship, and then one is Witnessing the Impossible, which is like his documentation of everything that happened in the skull sessions. So I highly suggest his books too, as well. I mean, I know there was the popular book by the Solomons, but Robin's books are great.
Great. Well, yeah, maybe you can, like I said, maybe you can connect me and we can do that. I'd love to have that on there, and I'd love to showcase them and their story. This is fascinating. We all want proof that there's something else going on, that there is something else. What do you make of people that project images onto unproduced film? Do you think, knowing how film works, knowing how cameras work, knowing how exposure works, can you find any logical sense to understand what is going on? Or because we are all electromagnetic energy, does it make sense to you that, yes, we should, with concerted focus, should be able to impress upon things like film these images?
Well, I learned early on that, people don't really study or know much about stage magic.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard for somebody like me who has not studied stage magic to say definitively how something actually happened. And like, for example, with the Ted Serio stuff, even though it's such a freaky story, the images look as if you held, a bent slide in front of a lens, because it's kind of out of focus and it's kind of sphere-like. So it has the visual connotation of something, phony. But that said, there's so many details of the story that you just can't figure out. So, I don't know. I always think of the stage magic thing, and for whatever reason, stage magic and spirituality are so separate in our everyday. But like, in ancient or, prehistoric or, the earliest forms of religion, those things were together and merged, and something could be true and false at the same time. So I think there's something to this, and I'm not trying to cop out of the answer. I'm trying to say that, simulation is the essence of all magical practice. So, is something simulated and then it brings about the real, or, does faking experiences induce the real experiences? Is there value in doing a magical thing? Can we do impossible things? We know that there's tons of documentation of bizarre physical happenings. That is I don't think there's any question about that. People like to ignore it, like Charles Fort called it, the information, like the damned information that nobody wanted to deal with, that science just found uncomfortable, so didn't even talk about. or scientists. So I don't know. I just feel like there's more questions than answers about all of it. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
So with that said, then, did you answer many questions for yourself with this work? 16 years. I mean, this is the culmination of a lot of work and research and travel and heart and desire into this book. And I know you can't give a definitive answer, but what can you tell me? I mean, what do you believe that there is consciousness that survives the body and it is or does have the ability to communicate?
I've had experiences that I cannot deny were so powerful and so strong and so strange yes, I do believe it. But then I've had ones that make me realize it's not something you can predict or hold still for very long or make other people believe, and it's totally based on personal experience. And I ended up getting even more interested in photography as this conscious act, and thinking about like, it's me taking the pictures. So my consciousness is somehow having this experience, too. So I'm trying to take the viewer on this trip through all these spiritualist ritual and experiences, but I'm also kind of embedded in there too and having the experiences. I don't know. Yeah. But yes, I've had a lot of really phenomenal experiences that, I know that there is something to all of this. I just can't make any definitive conclusions about what to tell people about it. I'm trying to create a work that engages people and makes them question or explore or go on a journey for themselves, I guess.
And that's a great journey. It's a great journey to take people on and to share, because it's giving a window into the possibilities of something more. And that's got to be fascinating. Were there ever points during your journey where you just thought, there's not enough there for me, there's not enough meat on the bone for this? Or was it kind of like Vegas? Every time you'd start to falter, would it pay out just enough to get you to go, ooh, wait a minute, I got to keep digging into this?
That's funny that you asked that, because when I first started talking, I think I mentioned that I got very frustrated early on, thinking I'm not really making any pictures that really relate to what I'm trying to photograph. And I really thought spiritualism was something that you could not photograph, and I shouldn't be doing a project about it because it was impossible. So I stopped the project in 2005. And I was going to abandon it completely, incomplete. But I couldn't stop thinking about spiritualism, and I was still visiting, and I have friends who are mediums, so I was still involved, but I was not photographing. And I just started reading a lot of parapsychology books and the history of the study of it. And a book that I came across that was hugely influential to me was George Hansen's The Trickster and the Paranormal. And that book kind of presented a case for the either or and the in between, and that, you're not going to get black and white answers with this stuff, because it's inherently liminal, which means it's between binaries. It's between life and death and heaven and earth, and, even, that in between the two opposites is where you find chaos, but lots of meaning as well. And that, he introduced me to the term mixed mediumship, and, the concept of the trickster at play with all of this paranormal stuff. And that really resonated with me, because, some days I would feel like, oh, this stuff something's really happening here. And then the next day I would be like, oh my gosh, it's all, it's a false path to be looking at. And it was his definition of the trickster as in terms of paranormal theory and thought. It's really an ethnography of the paranormal, of paranormal culture, that book. And I don't know if you've ever read it or are familiar with it, but I am
familiar with it. He's also part of the Brotherhood of Magicians, right? So I always find it interesting when you can talk to a magician who knows about how easy it is to play with people's minds and smoke and mirrors them. I'm always fascinated by their take on the paranormal. And I've, good friends with some magicians who believe in it wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And others who you couldn't prove it, there's no amount of proof you could give them that would ever make them believe that exists.
Right. Well, George is I think his take is it's real, but there is this trickster element at play, and a lot of people do fraud, but sometimes that can play into the real stuff. He's an advocate for people understanding that magic is an ancient art, that exists, that people have studied for thousands of years, that not everybody knows about. I mean, it's really hard to learn magic. You have to. All the information is in private libraries, so the stage magician is a really important person within paranormal, but it's not always seen that way, I guess.
Right. No, I totally agree. I do have to mention, listen, folks, are you hiring? Do you know where to post your job to find the best candidates? This is what I'm going to talk to you about. ZipRecruiter, they've been with us for over a year now in advertising. ZipRecruiter is the best when it comes to finding the best. ZipRecruiter posts your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards with just one click. Then ZipRecruiter actively looks for the most qualified candidates and invites them to apply. They even review every application so they can identify the top candidates so you never miss the perfect match. That's why ZipRecruiter is different. That's why Beyond the Darkness works with ZipRecruiter. Unlike other hiring sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on the right candidates finding you. It goes out there proactively and finds them. No wonder 80% of employers that post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. ZipRecruiter, it's the smartest way to hire. So find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes and industries to find the most qualified job candidates with immediate results. Right now, my listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. Just a little gift from your buddies at Beyond the Darkness. That's right, free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/darkness. That's ZipRecruiter.com/darkness. One more time, try it for free. Go to ZipRecruiter.com/darkness, and you will know why they are the best in the industry. Don't wait anymore. Miracles don't happen. Lightning bolts don't always strike where you need them. Be proactive and let the good folks at ZipRecruiter help you make your better business decisions. All right. Shannon, I know time is slipping away from us. You're doing something really exciting and interesting with this book in the way that you're making it available. And I want people to get an understanding of this. How can they order the book? We're going to have links up on today's podcast so they can find it, but explain to them what they can do and what they can get by signing up and getting your book now.
Okay, great. So I'm publishing with a crowdfunding publisher in the UK called Unbound, and they're giving me the freedom to do the book exactly the way that I want to, which I'm very excited about. So I'm pre-selling a number of copies, and as soon as I reach my goal, the book is going into production. I'm going to have great distribution. But the cool thing about if you are part of this pre-sale, you become a patron, and your name is listed as like a supporter and a patron of the project in every edition of Seance that will ever be published. And you get behind-the-scenes updates and kind of like a lot of material that is concerning the project that won't necessarily be made public, and then you get a book when it's ready to. As soon as I'm funded, it'll go into production, and then it gets mailed to you. And there's also, I have some other perks like, bent spoons and readings and tarot readings and pictures and prints and lots of fun other things as part of the pledge packages. But you could just go and buy the book too.
Well, get it, folks. You guys are always interested in this. You want more of the best. Here's a chance to get in on the ground floor and get this book for yourself. And the fact that the publisher is allowing her to publish the book the way she wants it to be delivered. And you've got a professional photographer with over, how many years have you been involved in the field?
I started studying photography when I was 19, and I've been working professionally since I was 24. So yeah, I'll be over 20 years. 20
years in the field, knowing what she's able to put together and share with you, getting information and awesome photos from an expert. this is your chance for you paranormal interests and people that are always looking for the next new book. This is your chance to get on board and get a copy. Plus, you get some really cool little perks for doing that up front. So make sure you go check it out. The link is right there for you on today's podcast. You can find it right there on today's podcast, either on our apps, on iTunes, I believe, in the description, or right at podcast1.com. If you're having trouble finding that link, just send me an email, dave@darknessradio.com. After you flatter me for 2 or 3 sentences, then I'd be more than happy to share that link with you directly so you can find the book and purchase it for yourself. Time is slipping away. I've really appreciated chatting with you on this. And when you were showing and sharing this information with Dan, and you were in Lilydale kind of going through this, were there points that he brought up to you that you hadn't even considered when looking into this?
No, I think we ended up talking about the history a lot, but I think he was surprised and excited that somebody was doing a project like this, and I think that's why he offered to do the forward, because I don't think he was expecting that I had done all of this modern photography on the topic. So yeah, we mostly talked about his historical stuff, but he did tell me, I'm just really interested that you're doing this as art and you're doing an art project about this topic. And so he wanted to write something.
Awesome. Well, that's great. We wish you a lot of success and hope that once the book is mainstream and big in the publish, just let us know. We'll retweak our listeners and let them know that the book is out there and they can find it. But again, don't hesitate. Don't wait. Order your book now. Get in on the ground floor and make sure that you get into the first run of the books. It's going to be fantastic. Shannon, thank you so much for spending some time with us here.
Thank you so much. I had a great time talking.
Excellent. We will be back tomorrow, folks, right here on the best in paranormal talk radio. And I want to thank everybody that's writing in and thanking us and congratulating us for 12 years on the air. I can't get to everybody's emails, but I'm doing my best. So thank you very much for the love and support. And for those of you still seeking the DVD of Paranormal Challenge, the series I was a part of, I do have some still available. Just email me, dave@darknessradio.com. I'll sign the copies. They're only $30 a set. That's all 3 discs, the entire series in one collection, and my copies of my book, The Other Side, A Guide to Ghost Hunting and the Paranormal. I'll sign those. Those are $10. You can get them individually for $30 for the DVD set, $10 for the book, or you can get them for $40 together and save on shipping. That's only $3.95 shipping and handling out the door to you, autographed on both. If you're interested, just email me, dave@darknessradio.com. My lovely wife will send you the invoice and we'll get them shipped out immediately. That's it for today. Be kind, love one another. We'll be back again tomorrow with more of the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.